Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Peyton Robertson, the Director of the Office of Organizational Excellence for the National Weather Service. I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm just going to kick things off and welcome you all here. Thinking back last year, this time we were getting ready to get together in Albany, New York and have our regular summer partners meeting. Sorry we can't do that this year. Even if you look at my mugshot, I haven't looked like that in 4.5 months. So things have changed a lot, right? We still want to stay in touch with you. We still want to really stay engaged with you. And we know that during this time, there's a lot going on that's important for us to stay connected and stay sharing on. So we came up with the theme of a change in the weather and today's, including the Atlantic 2020 hurricane season update. Who could know that would have been so prophetic to land here on this day and this time? But appreciate everybody being on board today. And I'm going to turn things over to Andrea Bleistein to run through logistics in the call. So Andrea, here you go.
Great. Good afternoon, good morning for some of you. And what I know has been a busy few days for those of us on the East Coast. As Peyton mentioned, this is the first installment of a National Weather Service Partners webinar series we're conducting here through the month of August. This series is really meant to have built off of the May 15th webinar that many of you joined us earlier this year, where we talked a lot about the current and even potential impacts of the ongoing pandemic on operations, managing risk, our supply chain, research, undergraduate learning, as well as just our overall workforce. And so, as Peyton mentioned, today's focus is on providing some weather service updates, as well as a focus on the 2020 hurricane season. And hopefully we'll be able to dig into some more discussion and conversation with all of you. Each webinar is going to be set up in a panel style with distinguished experts covering many of these topics over the next couple of weeks. And of course, how timely it is for today, given Isaias's impacts along the East Coast, focused around the hurricane season. So let's get started. Just a few logistical updates for all of you. If you're dialed in on your phone, please make sure you've entered your audio pin. That way, when we do open it up for some question and discussion, you'll be able to participate there. Your lines will remain muted until I let you know otherwise, so that we can open up the conversation. And we are going to be recording the webinar for posting at a later date. And then last but not least, I do want to actually introduce and welcome our distinguished panelists today. Mary Erickson, who's our Deputy Director here at the National Weather Service. We will have Sean Smith, who is an emergency response specialist for us at the National Weather Service Ops Center today. You may have recalled that Ken Graham, our Director of the Hurricane Center, was slated to be on our panel, but as you can imagine, he's a little bit busy today, and so we did still want to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about Isaias, and so Sean's going to give us that quick update. And then one of our external panelists, Michael Manning, he's the President and CEO of the Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank, and he's going to provide some really great insight into the community VOAD organizations and how they've made adjustments over this hurricane season. So with that, I'd like to get started. I'm going to toss the slides over to Mary, and she's going to kick us off today. Mary, take it away.
Okay, thank you. And thanks very much again to Michael and Sean for joining us today. So today we're just going to do a quick overview. You know, we usually at these partners meetings, we talk a little bit about some infrastructure and operations updates. So we'll go over a couple things we wanted to let you know. And then, we've gotten a lot of questions about how is NOAA and Weather Service managing through the pandemic and as we're entering into hurricane season to make sure that we're continuing to provide our services, but doing it in a cautious and safe way. So we want to talk a little bit about how we're doing that. And then I think one of the key topics that both Michael and I are really interested in engaging you on for discussion today is thinking about resilience through multi-hazard events. So we'll tee up a few ideas from each of us and then open it up for discussion. Okay, next slide. So first of all, a couple of updates on dissemination. We've been talking through many of these partners meetings on where NOAA is going in terms of its cloud strategy. And we wanted to talk about our integrated dissemination program and how we're looking to manage that and align with the NOAA strategy. So of course, IDP is our on-premise private cloud. It's worked very well overall. But we do recognize, and we want to be really focused, that the materials, the products and forecasts and warnings that we have on IDP are those things that are really mission essential for ourselves and for all of our partners and for those organizations. And so we recognize not everything belongs on IDP. So our long-term strategy is to find a balance between this private on-prem cloud and public cloud services and what things should be in which places. So of course, just want to reassure everybody, IDP is here to stay. We are not going to be separating off any non-critical functions to other services which might not be as reliable. So we're very dedicated to making sure we sustain that reliability, but it's in trying to improve that reliability is why we're trying to focus on IDP and then also adding to our resources with some possible private cloud. So there's a couple of business imperatives here, 3 drivers really for us to be looking at private cloud, private public hybrid cloud mix. So one is just our IDP refocus, making sure that our primary mission essential functions are robustly served on the IDP. That's first and foremost one of our focuses. Second of all is the NOAA cloud strategy. We're wanting to align with that. The end state is making sure that there's a multi-vendor, multi-tenant commercial cloud environment that NOAA, for a lot of reasons and for a lot of different mission areas across NOAA, can take advantage of, and making sure that we have special suitable operations services for cloud based on agreed upon criteria. Services is what I meant, not operational things. We're not going to be moving those to that public cloud, but the idea is making sure that they're suited to whatever things that we put there. And then lastly, we are always looking to improve and innovate on our technology that we have. So we want to be sure we've got a robust system for the future that allows us to do continuous improvement and continuous delivery, and make sure that we can improve and sustain our R&D transitioning into operations. So a couple of things that we've done is, so we're examining that business imperative. We're looking at what that hybrid approach looks like. Then as we've looked at the cloud mitigation approach, we're thinking very carefully about what our selection criteria is for some of our public cloud aspects, and thinking about security. NOAA, of course, has the NOAA Big Data Project, and now they've got some cloud utility contracts, and so we are looking at what those things offer and how we might be able to use those. Currently, and you can see on our stair step there, this is where we currently are. Currently, we're doing a few test projects of some things that we think are ripe to get off of the IDP and put in public cloud, and we're using some of those, the cloud utility contract and other things, to sort of test drive that. And of course, then we'll be learning lessons from that and seeing what the best way forward. So more to come. Just wanted to let you know that we are exploring that. Michelle's on the line. If you have questions afterwards, we can answer any questions you have. Next slide. So another thing that we get a lot of questions about, or a lot of feedback on, is NWS chat. And we've been talking with you about this regularly. We've had 2 goals here over FY20, really focusing on improving the stability and reliability of NWS chat. Our team has done a great job of really ticking through a whole punch list, if you will, on FY20 to improve the services of NWS chat. We have a dedicated system administrator. We've improved the application logging on chat. We've got mirrored environments now in Silver Spring and Kansas City, which allows us to go back and forth a little bit. We've updated our systems connections so that more users can use NWS chat at the same time. We've also worked to enhance performance by reducing any unnecessary load on the system and going through a series of daily system monitoring health checks. Essentially a whole set of things working to just make the current experience more robust. And we're putting all these things in place to prepare ourselves for FY21. These are some stopgap measures to improve the services. And then in 21, we'll be looking we'll be looking to transition it to the NWS private cloud infrastructure we just talked about, the IDP. There we have much better technology, and we're able to sustain a much more robust and higher on-time delivery, and also reduce the failover time. So we're looking forward to doing that in FY21. Okay, next slide. So the last infrastructure update that I have is about the GO17 ABI loop heat pipe. Everybody is pretty familiar with this. We believe we've had our OBS program working very closely with NSDIS to mitigate some of those impacts. So the system is not cooling the imager to the design temperatures, as you probably know. So particularly at certain times of the year, the imagery quality can be substandard in certain bands. Sometimes we're losing the water vapor at certain times of day. Particularly, we've found these to be overnight during February, April, August, and October. So at the request of the Weather Service, in partnership with us, NWS is going to reactivate the GOES 15 imager as a mitigation measure from August 9th to September 3rd, when we tend to have the biggest problems with the GOES 17 image quality, particularly during those overnight hours. So the GOES 17 will also change to produce 15-minute full discs instead of the 10 minutes for the 6 hours in the overnight period from 6 to 12 UTC. So that will slightly reduce the degradation. Next slide. So in case you haven't seen it, or just as a reminder, this is, you can see this is from Hurricane Douglas back on July 25th. You can see some of those horizontal disruptions in the image. So we were already starting to see this in late July, and usually it gets progressively worse as we get into the August timeframe. So as of August 9th, we'll also have that backup of GOES 15. So just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that. And we also have Tom on the phone if there's any questions. Actually, I think what I will do is pause right now and see if anybody has technical questions on IDP or on the observations portfolio before we keep going.
Thanks, Mary. I can unmute attendees, and or you can use the chat function as well. Not seeing any questions yet, Mary.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention, reiterate from our last partners meeting, the core principles for NOAA and Weather Service and reintegration as we deal with the pandemic, and that's being driven by science, the data of the hospital data, as well as the caseload data and the percentage of folks positive, getting local input in terms of managers that are at local facilities, what's going on in their community, making sure we're abiding by state and county laws. So we want to be smart about how we're doing this. We have a public health officer in NOAA who's very wonderful. He briefs us at least once a week, if not more often, on the appropriate measures and reviews all of the measures we're taking. And as you can see in this picture, this is our folks in Corpus Christi doing a shift change briefing as they prepare for HANA. So whenever we have more than 4 people in our operations area, we want to make sure that everyone has a mask on, because you're not able to social distance. And so you can see everybody was standing apart and being very careful. So this is what our operations look like today. We're trying to be steady and slow, making sure that as we change through our phased approach, if we feel we can slowly take more steps and be a little bit more open in some parts of the country, we're doing that in a very measured and careful way. And again, being flexible. We absolutely want to prioritize the safety of our workforce as well as sustaining our operational services. So those are the 2 priorities that we're keeping in place. Next slide. One thing we didn't have available, I believe, the last time that we briefed you was what the NOAA plan is, just for your awareness. I believe most organizations, we've all seen these in the press of different government agencies, private sector businesses. I'm sure most of you have some sort of a phasing approach. So phase 0 was when we first started in the pandemic, only working on mission essential activities. Of course, for the Weather Service, we never stopped operating. We never had our operational facilities without people going into them. So we had to make sure that we were doing that in a safe way. So phase 0 is where we started. With a lot of restrictions to travel and to how many people were going into the office. Phase 1, we are just beginning to move some of our offices into phase 1. And the idea here is if there are some parts of the country where the caseload has lowered and has gotten to a steady level, where we're allowing some additional activities to come into play, some critical support activities like system upgrades, critical engineering tests, doing some operational on-the-job training. We have continued to hire people throughout the pandemic, which is a really good thing. We're really excited to have those new employees, those frontline forecasters, for example, bringing on a lot of talent, but they need some on-the-job training, right? They need to get in and get familiar with the equipment. So we're trying to do a little bit of that in phase 1 in a careful way. In phase 1, we are only allowing as a maximum up to 25% occupancy in our office spaces, and continuing to maximize our use of telework and that type of thing. People need to have supervisory permission to go into those workplaces. Again, we're really focused on making sure that operational workplaces stay as safe as possible. So I would say we have a small number of our facilities right now, maybe 20% that are in phase 1. We evaluate these weekly. We've got a whole set of data provided by NOAA to our senior managers, and they're able to evaluate that for all the locations where we have facilities. And we look at that every week, and then we we're slowly adding in places that are in the phase 1. So this is kind of what the high level plan is for NOAA. At the Weather Service, every one of our operational facilities has their own plan. So they have very specific activities listed out of how they're handling the work at their particular facility. And as I said, you know, we are being very loyal to the mask policy, making sure that all individuals in the NOAA workplaces, whenever they can't social distance, are wearing those face coverings. Okay, next slide. So I think before we transition into talking a little bit more about the hurricane, just want to tee this up as a topic for us to talk about after we're through with all of our speakers. So as most of you are aware, NOAA and the Weather Service, we are used to, many in the weather industry are used to a battle rhythm, if you will say, when we have major events. We know who's going to be doing what types of operations. We practice this. We have a lot of different backup practices and COOP types of practices. We do that monthly in the Weather Service. So we've always been practicing that. And I think having that battle rhythm really helped us move into this. But there's no doubt that being in a multi-hazard threat environment definitely brings its own challenges. And of course, everybody on this call knows that there's no single agency or sector that owns resilience. In fact, you know, we're hearing a lot of studies. What does it mean to be resilient in the age of a pandemic? And what we're hearing is it's the network, it's the alignment, it's the collaboration across the organizations and across sectors that really is going to help us thrive. I think we're seeing that in the weather industry. It's a real source of pride of how well people have been able to respond. So when we need to have a new response, we see who's best suited to respond, and everyone is rising to the occasion. So we are seeing that we firmly believe that our investment in partner engagement, one of the things you see here in this circle is sort of a continuous improvement pathway that many of you are familiar with, one that we're using with our partners and customers as well, thinking about looking and evaluating at our services. How have we always done it? What do we have to modify based on COVID? Gathering in that information, translating that making the adjustments that we think are most important, and then getting feedback on that and going back and forth, reviewing that and responding, and then trying to put that into play and into operations, and then making the next adjustment. So, you know, this circle of listening, changing what we're doing, practicing what a new method might look like, and then modifying the operational practice. This is something we're used to doing, and I think it's helped us all be more nimble and more confident in the pandemic. Having said that, all of us, one of the things that's different is a lot of times when you're forecasting weather events, you're not necessarily a participant in that event in your own community. Of course, with the pandemic, we're all participants, right? And there's different stresses on us, physical stresses, financial, psychological. So one of the things is to think about and be sure that we recognize that backdrop in terms of thinking about our expectations of each other. But I do want to thank everybody on the call today for your engagement, that community engagement that across the sectors, from the nonprofits, we're going to hear from Mike in a minute, to the weather industry, to the federal government, and then down to the state and local level. We know it takes that that network, that vertical integration to be able to solve some of the tricky problems here. So just want to think about what questions it brings up, how we're all managing and mitigating the different risks that come up. Of course, hurricane season, next slide, is one of those things that we have to deal with, even though we're dealing with COVID-19. One of the things we've been able to work on as we came into the hurricane preparedness effort is to think about, well, what messaging might need to change? What do we need to be sure is included in our messaging? We were really pleased that we were able to work with the Centers for Disease Control on some of the safety messaging, where we were able to loop in messages that were approved by them for about how to think about where you shelter, how to think about preparing in advance. I know in NOAA, NOAA's fleet, of course, has done a ton of preparation for the hurricane season, making sure that they can fly safely and keep their crews safe, as well as a lot of NOAA facilities. What they've been started doing as early as June was making sure their facilities were fully ready, things put away for what they normally do as hurricane prep, so that they wouldn't have to rush out and have 50 people in a building to get it hurricane prepared. So those are a couple things we're doing. And of course, as you've seen Ken Graham on television, as he's doing some of the hurricane briefings, he's got his mask on. When they have media and other folks visiting the Hurricane Center, they're making sure they're following those protocols. What you don't see probably is that they've mapped out traffic flows in the office to minimize interactions and contact and all of that type of thing. So they've done a really good job. So at that time, though, we are experiencing right as we speak. I know I had 4.6 inches of rain at my house in the last 24 hours, so I was under one of those bands. So I want to turn it over to Sean Smith to talk a little bit more about Isaias.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Mary. Appreciate that. I'm going to give everyone an update on Tropical Storm Isaias here. We're going to quickly give you an update on the latest position of Isaias, and then talk briefly about the strong winds, heavy rainfall, and threat of tornadoes expected as we go into tonight. So fresh off the presses here from the National Hurricane Center at 2 p.m., Isaias was located 65 miles west of New York City, and it is racing north-northeast at 40 miles per hour, moving along very quickly with a maximum wind gust potential of 65 miles per hour. In fact, recently, within the past hour or two, at the entrance of the New York harbor, a buoy recently reported a sustained wind of 54 miles per hour and a gust to 63 miles per hour. So this threat of strong gusty winds is expected to continue into tonight from portions of the northern mid-Atlantic states up across New England. You can see here in the image here, these blue shaded areas along the coast are where we have tropical storm warnings in effect. There's also some tropical storm warnings along with flash flood watches and warnings, and even some tornado watches and warnings in effect for inland areas of New England and portions of the eastern mid-Atlantic. And we expect the strong gusty winds to cause some additional tree damage and power outages. Additionally, heavy rainfall is expected from Tropical Storm Isaias. There have been several observations between 4 and 7 inches of rainfall near the coast. Additionally, a broader area of about 1 to 3 inches from Virginia into Maryland. And Mary there, she said she got over 4 inches of rain. It's very impressive. We are expecting an additional 2 to 4 inches, generally from northeast Pennsylvania. Since the storm is moving pretty quickly, the rainfall has ended here in the local DC area, but we're expecting additional 2 to 4 inches, maybe isolated 6 to 8 inches with the heavy rainfall from northeast Pennsylvania across the New York metro area into the western portions of New England. And there could be some life-threatening urban flooding, as well as flash flooding and some scattered minor to moderate river flooding is likely across portions of New England. Additionally, there have been numerous tornadoes that have already occurred over portions of the mid-Atlantic overnight and into this morning, up to 19 reports of tornadoes associated with Tropical Storm Isaias. Additionally, there are tornado watches currently in effect, extending from around the Philadelphia metro area up through southern New England. And we expect the spread of tornadoes to continue to spread into New England this afternoon and into tonight. So that's all I have for my update on Tropical Storm Isaias, and I'm standing by for any questions you may have.
Great, thank you, Sean. Appreciate that timely update. We are going to transition to our third panelist this afternoon, Mike Manning, who I mentioned is the president of the Greater Baton Rouge Food Bank. He's going to provide some remarks from his perspective on how his organization and his point of view on preparing for this season in light of our ongoing pandemic. So Mike, take it away.
Where I come from. I've been the leader at this food bank for 17 years, just about 17 years now. And my disaster response experience from food banking perspective started with Hurricane Katrina. And I've responded to all the Louisiana events and have been deployed to other events, Superstorm Sandy, Florence, et cetera, across the country to provide some insight, if you will, or from our experience. And in 2016, with the floods in Louisiana, our facility was inundated with 4 feet of water. And what that means is we're out of business, essentially. We moved to a different location and we were back to 70% of our capacity within 4 days. That's a tribute to the resilience of the team we had in place there. We were also back into our warehouse to be able to use our warehouse facility within 4 weeks of the flood. So we did some things proactively. Our COOP plan and other things were in place to be able to position us. So we've got some experience that we share across the country with other food bankers, especially. You may have also heard I am now the chairperson of the board of directors of National VOAD. And a lot of that is because of the state VOAD experience I've had. And let me give you a little explanation or a little description of VOAD, National VOAD. It's basically VOAD, Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And it, of course, consists of the national members that everybody thinks of in disaster, the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, the Mennonites, et cetera. So it's really the connection point for all of those nonprofits and the major nonprofits in the country, along with the state and territory VOADs, to really connect and do things right. We have embedded a national VOAD representative at the National Response Coordination Center for FEMA. So we are on the front lines. We're there to help coordinate. And we operate under the 4 C's. Those are our guiding principles, if you will. We communicate, we collaborate, we coordinate, and most importantly, we cooperate. There are limited resources out in the nonprofit community for disaster response. So it's very important that we are communicating and not duplicating effort to allow us to be able to accomplish the things we need to do and provide a response for the whole community and try to encourage whole community preparedness in advance of an event so that we can be more resilient as we go forward. I'm also the president of the food bank, and we're part of Feeding America, the national food bank organization, which is roughly a little over 200 food banks across the country that provide food to those most in in need, the vulnerable populations who are most at risk during a disaster. Well, most people think of when they think of a food bank, they think of the pantry at their church. We are not that. We provide food to the pantries at churches. We know how to handle food safely, and we know about logistics for distribution and other things. Food banks have operations similar to what you would think of as a distribution center for a Walmart or another retailer. And we are basically that distribution center and distribute the food to our agencies who are the last mile. And those agencies consist of food pantries at churches, shelters, meal sites, and we also do mobile distributions, which have been very valuable. That experience and practice that we have in place been very valuable for us in this COVID environment. And to give you some perspective of the size of our organizations, our food bank here in Baton Rouge is roughly a $20 million a year operation. We're housed in a 172,000 square foot warehouse facility, and we will distribute over 15 million pounds of food this year. When you talk about the network of Feeding America food banks, the 200 food banks, you're talking about a total of 2,300 vehicles, 7.7 million square feet of warehouse space that supports 60,000 agencies throughout the country. And we average 2 million volunteers a month. So we know how to do donations management and how to manage volunteers. So we have a unique perspective. And we are unique in the fact that we are in our community before, during, and after any disaster. We've been distributing food at significantly higher levels across the country as a result of the pandemic. And when you start talking about 6 months, when you're used to a normal disaster response of a shorter period with this type of intensity, it's really been a challenge. But the team we have in place has really been excellent to rise to the challenge and get even more creative in educating our force multiplier in the National Guard to actually learn how to do distributions the way food banks do it. To give you some insight on some of the COVID adjustments that we've made and that the nonprofit organizations are going to have to make in a disaster, the real concern is so many of the other organizations that provide support in the community have been essentially out of business. They've been closed because of and unable to provide services. And we're going to have to make adjustments in how we respond to disaster. We've got several questions we are figuring out. How do you protect your volunteers? How do you shelter people impacted by an event? How do you console and provide emotional and spiritual care to people impacted when you're dealing with a pandemic? You're dealing with 6 feet of separation. You're dealing with so many other things that come into play. How are we performing feeding and food distribution? How are we going to cover for congregate feeding that's not going to be available? And we all had pandemic plans. I think everyone, we've gone through these plans, gone through the tabletop exercises, but that's what they were. They were plans and tabletop exercises. And anyone who's been in a disaster understands that each disaster is different and it requires adjustments on the fly, and what you may have expected from previous experience is not what you may face in the current situation. And this is the first true implementation and application of those plans in a real world setting. We as food banks have had an advantage because we've been operating throughout the pandemic, doing mobile distributions in much the same fashion that the aftermath of a disaster, a flood or a hurricane or whatever. But we're just doing it with a few additional safety protocols. We're staying 6 feet away. We're communicating with recipients through closed car windows. We're distributing directly into trunks of vehicles. All staff are wearing personal protective equipment. And we've been able to utilize the Louisiana National Guard as a force multiplier to help us do larger distributions. When you start talking about the impact of pandemic, and then you overlay a disaster on top of it, it's going to require us to do much larger distributions. And we we've had the opportunity to implement some of the plans, find out what works and doesn't work, because we've been operational. Not everyone else in the nonprofit arena, they're coming into a disaster with a new experience and the new limitations of what they can and can't do. There are a couple of major concerns as we move forward with disasters during a pandemic. When you think about all the money and the philanthropy that has been undertaken in COVID-19 response, what's the condition of the philanthropic community going to be able to respond to a disaster with funding, if there's a major disaster? And then will the VOAD organizations, all the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, et cetera, be able to raise enough money to be able to respond at the levels necessary? And then the second big question is, will the rest of the nonprofit community that has been sidelined from providing services amid the pandemic, will they be able to survive and be able to provide much needed services in those other areas that are outside, that are outside of food, that are, those emotional issues, those counseling issues, and other things that may crop up, especially in response to a disaster. And Mary's team asked that I provide a little insight into how the weather community can help. I guess the big thing is, NOAA has already reached out to National VOAD to become part of the family and become a partner and resource. There's no reason that others can't do the same with National VOAD or with Feeding America. And Ken Graham, although Ken could not join us because of this little weather event that we're having, I really want to give Ken Graham a lot of credit for what he did when he was in the New Orleans and Baton Rouge region for the Weather Service, with his efforts to educate and to bring people online to understand the tremendous tools that are now becoming available, so that people can have a good level of information. And it positions us as nonprofits for planning. It also positions the emergency managers for planning. But it also helps us to educate the people we serve and to make sure that they have the appropriate perspective on what's coming and what can happen. And not to take it for granted that there could be one event. All it takes is one storm. All it takes is one tornado. And that's the perspective we've tried to do. And Ken did a tremendous job helping us do that in Louisiana. It also helps us to be those additional educators and communicators to those people, because the people that we serve, especially at food banks, are the people who can't prepare for 72 hours of food, who are already in a distressed situation because they're having to face hunger. So it's much more important for us to be able to respond and take care of them and give them as much information as possible. Nonprofits come together to support communities. That's what VOAD is. That's what food banks do. And it's not just large organizations at the national level like the Red Cross or the Salvation Army. It's small organizations in local areas that step up on a daily basis that try to respond even more when there's a disaster. And any support, any engagement, any spreading of the word of what we do can go a tremendous way to help us in being able to respond to disaster, but also having people become aware that we're out here and that we do the National VOAD, Feeding America, the food banks, that we're on the front line on a daily basis. And when a disaster hits, we just ramp it up and feed more people, for example, in the food banking world. We take care of our communities because we're a part of them. And with that, I'll turn it back over.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike. I appreciate all those comments, and I definitely want to open this up for discussion. Welcome back, Mary. So just a few logistical things. I'm going to unmute you all again. We can only have about 25 lines unmuted at any given time. So unless you really are going to speak up, keep yourself muted anyway. You can also use the question box, and I know I have one already in there that we could probably follow up on a little bit later. But please use that tool as well, and I'll be monitoring the question box. But I'm going to take moderator privilege here. And as I open up the actual mute option for everybody else on the line, I would like to see Mary or Mike, from your organization's perspectives, what has been an unexpected positive change or adjustment that you've made over the last 5 months? Who wants to go first? Mike?
I was trying, I was muted. I couldn't get off mute. Okay. I'm happy to start and then hand it over to Mike. So, one of the things that I wanted to mention that's been something we've noticed is as we've had to transition with a lot more virtual work, even in our operational space with some of our work on how we interact with partners and others, it has had a factor of unifying, I would say, across the weathers, even across our own network and with our partners, sort of unifying across space, where you used to have a little bit more barrier because you were used to who you might get together with in a certain region of the country or with a certain NCEP center or one of those different areas of expertise. By having more people be virtual like we are today, it's also made it a little more egalitarian. So we've actually seen, we've been working hard to do a lot of consistency work and a lot more collaboration through events, and we've just seen that skyrocket. It's really done tremendously well. So I think even though there's a lot of IT challenges and, across multi-organization, multi-sector, I will say, coordination with video is a challenge because we all use different tools. So that's one of the Shangri-Las we've still got to realize. But other than that, I think the collaboration has really been a welcome addition that's been much stronger.
Well, we've been the exact opposite because we've been frontline operational, and that's good for us because that's our element and that's where we can really thrive and see the rewards and the benefits of what we do. When you can get somebody a box of food who's unemployed, who hasn't gotten any unemployment benefits or any money from the government yet, and you can feed that person, it's really validating. And our team has just been phenomenal in stepping up, ramping up to our normal, I hate to use the word normal, but disaster level responses with mobile distributions of 1,500 households at a time. And they've just risen to the occasion and just proven what kind of a team they really are to be able to do that. It's just, that's the biggest thing for me is to see the growth of so many young people on our team and take on additional responsibility and challenges. It's reassuring for the future to see that our younger team members step up.
Great, thank you, Mike and Mary. All right, so I've unmuted or given you the option to unmute yourselves now on the GoToWebinar. So I'd like to open it up and see if anybody has a question. Actually, here we go. I've got one in the chat. Question for Mike. What kind of weather support do you require for VOADs? And there's a second part if you have time. How do you coordinate between VOADs to take advantage of each of the individual VOADs' talents?
Well, the second question is the easy part because the organizations all have their skill sets. For example, there are groups that are the muck and gut out specialists. There are people who are the feeding specialists. The Baptist men, for example, join in there with the Red Cross sheltering. So we really all gravitate to our strengths, and that's the beauty of VOAD. It's bringing all the core strengths of individual organizations to cover the breadth of the disaster as opposed to one organization trying to do it all. And we share a lot of information. We have state VOAD calls consistently, so we can talk about response. We exchange information, we learn from each other. So it's really advantageous for us to do that because it's much easier to plagiarize than to script your own response.
Thanks, Mike. I guess, and to get to the first part of the question, what do you actually have weather support that a VOAD would maybe be needing?
That's a tremendous question. I'm kind of the resident weather geek in Louisiana that's not a weather person. So I am the one that takes the point on that. But a lot of VOAD organizations, especially in Tornado Alley and other things, rely on a lot of the National Weather Service resources and access them to be able to make decisions about whether to deploy today or not, where to go, how to go. So we are really dependent on the information from the Weather Service and the forecasters. We work very closely with the local forecasters, especially in television and others who are our conduit to get a lot of the additional information that we as a small or a smaller food bank organization can't access otherwise. Now you're muted now.
There we go. I'm going to go back in and look. If for some reason you're unable to unmute yourself, you can raise your hand too, and I can selectively unmute you. So I'll do a scroll here. Not seeing anybody raising their hand. There was a more technical question. We might have to do a follow-up, Mary, related to NOAA port. Somebody asked whether or not if there were any plans for NOAA port text data in the cloud. I don't know if we know the answer to that today, but we can definitely follow up if we don't.
Yeah, I don't have the list in front of me. We have a list of about 20 or 30 applications and which ones we think might go in the cloud. But I don't have that right in front of me. So Michelle might know. She had to drop off for another meeting. So we'll circle back on that, though. We'll take that question. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Dave Jones, do you have another follow-up question? So Mike, I know you had mentioned a little bit in your remarks about how the weather community can get more involved or help support the VOAD community. Are there particular links or things that we could provide as a follow-up resource, perhaps for our partners if they have additional questions after this webinar?
Website, which is nvoad.org, or they can go to Feeding America's website and get information on the food bank network and what we're doing there. But those are the best two locations to go for VOAD information. All states have VOADs. Some of their websites are stronger than others, but the best point is just to go to National VOAD and connect there, and we can connect you into local state and local VOADs and territory VOADs to make sure that the information gets to the right people.
Great, thank you. Okay, other questions from those on the line? Please don't be shy. We've got the chat function as well. I'm happy to read off a question if you have one.
Hey, Andrea, can you hear me?
I can.
Hey, this is Dave. Sorry, I started asking my question and it went on mute again. I just had a quick question, Mary, for you. We're doing a lot of work with the IDP system, but we're also see that there's Coast Watch and Now Coast and other forms of trusted data within NOAA, and of course WPC and NHC have their own GIS files available. Are you looking, in your earlier comments when you said that you were looking to identify the key data sets to go into IDP, does that mean from those other sources too, from Coast Watch and Now Coast? And just wondering if you could comment on the operational trustworthiness of those platforms versus IDP. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that question, Dave. Hope you're doing well. I think that the short answer is what we're focused on right now is those that we find that are mission essential functions for Weather Service and our partners, and that we have some control over, right, where it's our jurisdiction to provide those. So Now Coast, of course, we have been very involved with. That is evolving. So we'll see where that goes in the future. And of course, with the Water Center and Weather Prediction Center, those are all all things that are internal. So we'll be looking at those, or making sure they have some equivalent of making sure that their products can go out that way. Coast Watch probably would not be on IDP, but I know that Michelle also has a, we have a Weather Service GIS team that's actively working with many members of other parts of NOAA, like NESDIS and like the Ocean Service, for example, who have other types of GIS services. For example, we're using the underpinnings of the NOS IRMA service to set up our GIS services. So we are trying to unify them, if you will, even if the actual pushing out and care and feeding of them aren't all in one place. So something to look at. But yeah, if there's issues with those things, or you need those to be at that next level of reliability, whether it's NESDIS or NOS or ourselves, let us know, and we'll look to see what we can do. We do collaborate a lot across the line offices on that. So thanks.
Great, thank you.
Great. Any other questions from those on the line? We've got a few minutes for another question or two.
And Andrea, I might add too, if anyone even wants to talk or make any comments about how they're part of the weather industry is doing, what they've found to be a pleasant surprise or a positive, maybe things they think that we could do better together to help increase the resilience given what we're finding.
I would love that. Anybody want to talk to what maybe their organizations are doing? Or share some ideas that they might have? You can raise your hand. I can unmute you if you're having any challenges. We'll have to do that as a follow-up question, Mary, I think. I'd be very interested in that. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. Michael or Mary, is there anything you'd like to lend before we wrap up today, or any key takeaways that you'd like to leave this group with?
Well, I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity to connect with the weather community, because it's so important to us in the nonprofit community, because of our ability to respond is so dependent on the information you can give us.
Yeah, thanks very much to you, Mike, for joining us. And we do see you as a strong partner. As I said, we talk a lot when we talk about resilience and building a weather-ready nation. We talk a lot about the decisions, the most critical decisions are being made at that community level. So it's great. We thank you for your work and all that you're doing, both with Feeding America and with the VOADs, to make sure that people have the resources that they need, even as we're predicting the events themselves. I think, Andrea, one of the things that I just like to leave people with is just thinking again about what else we can do to strengthen this community that we have across the weather industry, because I do think that it's these kinds of interactions that we've had, the fact that we do meet. I know we're missing that we can't meet and mingle together like we would at a normal partners meeting. We have a lot of side conversations at tables and in the hallway. So we'll have to figure out what the virtual version of that is, and maybe we can keep looking at tools. Please let us know if you have any suggestions for what you would like that to look like, because we know that that underpinning of collaboration and coordination and communication, all those C's that Michael mentioned, is what's helping us thrive right now. So let's make sure we pay attention to that and have some care and feeding of that. Secondly, I will mention that just today, our public health officer gave us a pretty sobering reminder of all the data across the country in terms of the COVID-19. So I just ask everyone to take heed of all of the precautions that we've been told about, the basic health precautions, being careful about where and when you travel, how you travel, staying apart from people to the extent that you can. And as Michael was saying, there's a lot that can be done in a safe way. We're finding that we're going into all of our operational spaces In the weather service, what I can say for sure is while we have had employees that tested positive for COVID-19, all of them were, were infected from community contacts, and none of them have been transmitted, from being in the operational workspace. So we often say, I'd rather go to one of our operational workspaces than go to the grocery store. So we've worked really hard to make them safe. So I hope that everybody on the phone will be able to do that for themselves and their families as well. So take care, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Mary. And just to wrap up for today's webinar, I did want to give you the preview for the next three in our series. We'll be talking next week with John Murphy, our Chief Operating Officer for the National Weather Service, Anthony Bush, who is from Raytheon, and Alicia Wasula from Shade Tree Meteorology. They're going to give us their perspective on managing risks, managing their businesses, and a little bit on the supply chain. So look forward to that. And then the next 2 weeks will be focused on undergraduate research, undergraduate learning and research, and then also a much larger conversation on trends for the workforce across our entire enterprise. So looking forward to those discussions with additional panelists that you've seen in our announcement. So thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Sean, for the latest updates on ESIS. Everybody stay safe, and we look forward to hosting you again a week from today. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Be well.